Okay, we're live. This is episode 2 of Inflection. I'm co-host, Brian Berletic, and this is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo.
Hi, Brian. Nice to be back on your on the show. Huh?
Yes,
so
it's
on your radar
going
today?
well.
What's on your radar?
Okay. So we're gonna do some headlines, and then we're going to move into the main topic, which is it's no longer protests in Myanmar; it's armed conflict. But before that, let's just go over some of these headlines. So the first one I want to talk about is this. US tells Russia it won't rejoin arms control pact that was undermined by Russian violations. And this sub headline right here, Trump announced the US exit from the treaty in 2020, but US and Russian officials had held out the possibility that the two sides could rejoin. Isn't that kind of funny how Biden is carrying on everything Trump was doing? Trump withdrew from the treaty. And I remember when Trump was withdrawing from these treaties, people were saying, well, this was because that's what Putin wants and he's a Putin puppet. But now Biden is doubling down on this decision to scrap all these treaties. And I had written this article in 2018, and this was about the US and their history of withdrawing from all of these treaties. This all started after the collapse of the Soviet Union under George Bush Jr. He withdrew from very important arms control treaties. And then there was this intermediate range nuclear forces treaty that the US withdrew from, and that was under Trump. And people were arguing that they're doing this to benefit Russia. But of course, even before the US withdrew from that treaty, they were already developing missile systems that would be illegal if deployed under this treaty. So they had prepared for this. And this was all about, number one, encircling Russia, and number two, selling missiles. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, they were making billions off of these treaties being scrapped, and the US being able to place missiles in Europe, but then also in Eastern Asia, in South Korea and Japan. So what do you think about that, Angelo? Trump and then Biden, and it's just one single foreign policy, no matter who you vote for.
No change. It's always the same. It's about following the money. Who's financing them? It's always the military-industrial complex. They need to create tensions, and they need an enemy. If you look at the budgets, compare the budgets of Russia compared to the US. I mean, do you have the figures? The US is we're talking about $750 billion. I mean, what is Russia? Is it like 100 billion? I mean, it's so far. It's so far. It's just ridiculous. They're building up this fear, and again, who's aggressing who? NATO always promised it will never get east, and it failed to keep its promises, and it's encircling Russia, and now it's encircling China as well. So it's all about creating tensions, but it's not. It's not working. In front of them, it's not a Yeltsin, it's a Putin, and Putin is a smart, is well ahead, and I think it got stronger. The Russia you have now is not the Russia of the Yeltsin era. It's much stronger. So I think it's not a good plan. It's actually, I have the impression sometimes that the US is doing the same mistake that the USSR did before it fell. There was this arms race, and the USSR didn't have the same means as the US. So it went along with the US, and at the end, it just got bankrupt. So I feel that right now, the USA is doing the same thing, is putting so much money. And again, keep in mind that the money that is put in the armaments in the US there's a lot of waste. The F-35, what was the budget? I mean, there's many figures, like over $1 trillion. It's a
over $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. Imagine, I mean, that's the GDP of a big nation. So it's failing. It's completely failing, I think.
That's a lot of good points there, especially about NATO vowing not to move eastward after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now they are literally on Russia's borders. And could you imagine if it was reversed, if Russia or China were doing this to the US, the outcry in Washington? So I thought that was crazy. Now, the next topic we're going to talk about is, and a lot of people have already heard about this, and I already made a video about this plane that was forced down by Belarus. There was this bomb threat. There's competing theories on who called it in and why. But ultimately, the plane landed in Minsk, and they arrested this protester, this opposition figure, Roman Protasevich. And at first, the US and the Western media were pretending like this was unprecedented, that how dare Belarus do this and break with international norms. But as you can see, this article here, this is from the BBC, and it says, Belarus plane arrest, is it a first? and of course, they eventually mentioned the 2013 incident where they forced the plane of Bolivian President Evo Morales to land. I believe it was in Austria, and that was because several Western European nations closed their airspace off to his plane. He didn't have enough fuel to go around, so they had to land in Austria. And then they searched the plane looking for Edward Snowden. And one thing I kind of want to point out about this is that Edward Snowden, what did he do? He exposed the US intelligence community breaking US law and abusing its own citizens, invading their privacy, doing things that were completely illegal. So he was a whistleblower, and the US was trying to arrest him. Now, who is this Roman Protasevich guy? Is he also some sort of Belarusian opposition hero who was exposing corruption and everything else? And the answer is no. He was, look, this is the picture that the Western media was showing us of him. And these are the pictures that Grayzone, in this excellent article that Ben Norton did, where he's fighting along Azov Battalion's side. Angelo, do you know anything about Azov Battalion? In Ukraine, by the way, not even in Belarus where he's from. He went to Ukraine fighting alongside Azov Battalion. Who's Azov Battalion?
Well, the Azov Battalion is the group, the neo-Nazi group that sided with the opposition in Ukraine during Maidan Revolution. Well, keep in mind, the West like to call it Maidan Revolution. In reality, it was a coup. There was a democratically elected president, and there was a coup, and was backed by the US. The US spent $4 billion to do the coup, and you had forces like quite evil forces. I mean, neo-Nazi from Ukraine, those guys are extreme. And it goes back, this movement, neo-Nazi in Ukraine, it goes back to the Second World War. They sided back then with the Nazi, and what was the name of the leader? Was Bandera or something like this? Do you have the name?
Yes, and it's Stepan Bandera. He resisted the Soviets and the Nazis, but then eventually he ended up siding with the Nazis, collaborating with the Holocaust in Ukraine. So we've been hearing all of this stuff about anti-Semitism, about if you dare criticize Israel as they brutalize Palestine. But then here's the US backing a regime that had militias out in the field that were neo-Nazi. And when we say neo-Nazis, it's not hyperbole, they're far right, so we're calling them Nazis. No, they have tattoos on their chest of Adolf Hitler or Hail Hitler on their chest or on their arms. Let's just do this. If you look here, the insignia on their arms, there's a better picture down here if we open it and we really look in here. This is a wolf's angle. This was one of the original symbols of the Nazi Party, and then it was used by military units during World War II by the Nazis. And so this is what they're wearing on their uniforms. And there he is. That's him right there. This is the so-called pro-democracy activist that Belarus arrested. So, I mean, real interesting. And actually, There he is with war weapons, and he was running around Ukraine with this group that was killing Ukrainians in Ukraine. In the eastern part of the country, these were Russian Ukrainians. They live in Ukraine. They're Ukrainian, but they have a Russian background. And I think the Grayzone, this article is great. I'm going to put the link to this in the video description when we're done. Do you have anything else to add to this, Angelo?
So he was actually managing the platform Nextdown Telegram, and it was a major platform. There's over 1 million people following that platform, and they were calling for like civil unrest. So I think we're comparing one arrest of he's a terrorist. I mean, this guy wants to create war, civil war in Belarus, and then you're comparing with stopping a plane of an elected president of Bolivia. I mean, imagine. Again, it's because, we remember, there was a coup against Evo Morales later on, but it's just, I'm shocked about this, but not about the fact that they're arresting one plane where you have an agent like Protasevich, and it's over Belarus land. I don't think it's a problem, and I think they're trying to sue Belarus over. There's an institute that is about air flights, that regulate air flights, and there's no way that Belarus will lose. And there's a strong backing of Russia and China in this institution that will protect Belarus. So again, I think Belarus is paying a price of siding China with China on the Belt and Road Initiative, and being kind of pro-Russia. There's the president of Belarus he used to have a mixed position. I think he was not always consistent whenever it came to Russia. But now it seems like the events are pushing Belarus towards Russia much more. I think it's one of those moments where you realize that all those pressures, they're trying to get hold. The US and the West is trying to get hold of some countries, and it's backfiring. Instead of getting Belarus in the NATO side, they're pushing towards China and Russia, and it's not the first example. We saw this with Thailand and many other countries. Whenever you're forcing too much, it's backfiring. They're going on the other side, and that's what is happening with Belarus.
Exactly. And something else that should be pointed out is maybe what Belarus did, if they did indeed stage a bomb scare to get that plane to land. It might seem extreme, but you have to understand, this guy, Roman Protasevich, look at what he was doing in Ukraine. Look at what the US did to Ukraine. They overthrew an elected government in a violent coup, and then it unraveled into this civil war where you had Ukrainians killing each other. There was massive loss of life. There were sections of the country that were destroyed. And think about it, when the US has done this to other countries like Libya or Syria or Yemen, look at the outcome there. So someone like Roman Protasevich is a national security threat, obviously. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that he was actually, let's get this back up here. He was actually also working for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is a US State Department media organization created by the CIA. And so that and his opposition media platform, also funded by the US government, this guy was not pro-democracy. He was an agent, a vector of foreign interference. So if people think that it is extreme to try to arrest somebody like this, he was alongside people killing Ukrainians in Ukraine, and he was being backed by a foreign government to divide and destroy his own country. So it is a clear-cut case that someone like that should be brought to justice, and he's not some innocent victim or activist.
Take the case if he was American, especially on the war on terror. the US was doing abductions all around the world. We had abductions in Italy without the consent of Italian government. We had abduction of imams. I mean, many people, they would just, like CIA would come in and just abduct people. So, if Protasevich was an American citizen and working against the US, trying to bring a coup, I mean, you could imagine an abduction, if not a killing, because this is how the US does, So I think Belarus did what he had to do. You shouldn't compromise whenever it comes to your national security, sovereignty, and treason, because it is a traitors. I would have done the same.
Yes. And this is a good point to jump into the main topic, Myanmar. It's kind of the same thing. It's a US-backed destabilization campaign. The opposition is now armed. This isn't something the Western media is even trying to deny. They were in the beginning, but just as I predicted, and it's not because I'm clairvoyant, it's just because this is how the US does it every single time. They have those protests as cover for armed militants that they had prepared ahead of time for this very specific purpose. And then for Myanmar's case, they have had armed militant groups operating there for decades, going all the way back to when Myanmar became an independent country. It used to be a colony of Great Britain. And so, let's see, let's just go and, you want to add some background information there?
Maybe we could talk about, just to give some background to people who haven't followed us, because there is one narrative, the Western narratives, that Myanmar is fighting for its democracy, and you have the military, which are oppressing people, killing people, and so on. And I think it's very important to put everything into perspective. The history, the colonial past first, and then also the perspective. It's been 50 years that Myanmar has civil wars. There's not a single country that under civil war or under war against another country which has held elections, because you can't. Whenever there's a war or civil war, you need to have the military to just protect the sovereignty and the kind of cohesion and peace. So Myanmar has been forced to hold elections for the last 20, 30 years, while it was not yet a sovereign state. It was not, first of all, because of the tensions. There's 135 minorities in Myanmar. It's extremely complex. It has a long history of colonial history, and then you had the meddling of the West, which started from the colonial past. So could you give maybe on your side the background? What started from the independence to the meddling of the U.S. and Aung San Suu Kyi, how she was pushed by the West, and the whole financing and the meddling of the U.S.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do a very quick summary, because we're probably going to have to, like we were talking before, people that are just joining might not know, and it might be a bit of a learning curve. So Myanmar used to be known as Burma. It was a British colony. Part of Britain's strategy to divide and conquer Myanmar was to prey on all of these ethnic groups, to divide them against each other. They had a colonial army there, and they used these ethnic minorities to fill up the ranks. And the Burman ethnic majority was excluded, and they were excluded from administrative roles. And they did that very deliberately to breed animosity among everyone in Myanmar. And so there was always this violence and division among them. And this is divide and conquer 101. This is what empire does. They're too busy killing each other to get together and kick the British out. And as soon as Myanmar gained its independence, Britain wasn't going to just respect that and leave. They continued pouring resources into these ethnic minority groups and to continue division in that country, so that maybe in the future, the UK and then the US might be able to assert Western primacy over Myanmar once again, kind of a recolonization, if you will. And this is where Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy comes in. They are a product, whole cloth, of US and British government funding, everything from the party itself, every prominent member of that party, you could look at their background, you could see that they're part of some NED, National Endowment for Democracy, which is the US government's funding arm for political interference around the globe, or US Aid, or the British equivalent, and also these Western corporate foundations like George Soros's Open Society. And then there's a whole network with media, election monitors, legal groups. They're all funded by the US government, and they all make up this huge country within a country. And this is what was slowly taking over the country, recolonizing it right under everyone's nose. And this is why the military in February this year finally, because like you said, they had these elections and Aung San Suu Kyi won because she has this huge foreign backing that Myanmar cannot compete with. The military cannot compete with them. The country's been under sanctions for decades. Their trade partners are China, Thailand, and Singapore. That's about it. And then some other countries have very small projects, and that's it. So she won the election, and she was just going to keep winning the elections because they were completely rigged in her favor because of this foreign interference. So that's why the military ousted her. And we've covered the foreign handlers that were her advisors. These are literally British and Australian citizens walking around with her, determining her economic policy, her legal policy, figuring out how they're going to rewrite the Constitution, things like this. And so now the U.S. is backing these protests against the military takeover. And these protests were violent from the beginning. And now they're openly armed. It's not even really protests anymore. It's armed conflict in the streets all over the country, and in the rural areas, it's combat in the jungles and in the hills. That's where we are right now. That's where we are today.
I'm just a little bit surprised about well, not surprised. The West is not mentioning anything about the charges. They never talk about the charges. And again, they call it a coup. In reality, under Myanmar constitution, it's a takeover. It's a constitutional takeover that should take maximum 1 year. Some of the charges are corruption. There are cases of corruptions where you have, we're talking about one is $600,000 and one is a donation of 6 kilos of gold. And you have, so the person that did that, you have a video evidence of him doing that. You know, he says on the video the timing, and he gave directly the money to Aung San Suu Kyi. But those are, you never see this in Western media. And also we suspect some are related to movements of seditions. You've seen like Soros people from funding from Soros Society, Open Society, were found and blocked. So there's probably some that are related to foreign meddling. But those information are coming out, but there's nothing. They're not talking about this in the media. What do you want to add something? Just another thing I'd like to add is I think your position is pretty much the same as mine. It's not we're not taking position pro military here. There might be some problems. Very often we say, the Western media say that the military are corrupted and so on. There's probably problems, endemic problems, which are related to Myanmar. What we are doing, I think our job is to expose the meddling. Because I think for us, it's not about ideology. It's not about, we're not pushing for socialism or right wing. We don't really care. I think what we want to expose all those color revolution, the meddling, interference, and above all, I think no matter if it's Myanmar or any other countries, sovereignty comes above everything else. You again, there's lots of contradictions. You can never have a democracy if you don't have, first of all, stability and sovereignty. I don't know if you agree with me. I think,
Exactly. I mean, what is democracy? It's a process of self-determination. If you have the dominating political party, National League for Democracy, basically being run out of Washington and London and Brussels, how is that self-determination? How is that not the absolute worst type of foreign interference imaginable? It's imperialism. It's not even them trying to influence the elections. They have hijacked them. They have hijacked the government and the institutions of Myanmar. They're overriding them with Western-funded alternatives. So this is modern-day imperialism, and I just want to kind of, just so people understand. I don't know if you've seen NED has this new logo. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh, that's new.
Yeah, that's new, and it kind of, I think it's very appropriate because it kind of looks like a Pepsi, AT&T, FedEx, all kind of mashed together. And it kind of reflects the fact that the NED, while they claim they're supporting freedom around the world, it's actually just a front for corporate financier interests in the US. The board of directors is stacked with warmongers and war criminals and the representatives from some of the largest corporations in the US. And look at this. This is for Myanmar 2020. And just look at all of these programs that the US government is funding inside of Myanmar. If Russia or China were doing this, this would be considered an act of war. All the people involved in these programs and organizations in the US would be immediately arrested and their organizations liquidated. And this is what's been going on in Myanmar for decades. They're involved in literally everything: unions, media, again, like I said, election polling. They have all of these programs for the ethnic minorities: Arakan State, Shan State. They have Kachin right here. They have for Karen. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's a rabbit hole, every single one of those that you dig into. Now, actually, the topic today that we want to talk about is how the Western media is now admitting that it is an armed conflict. So this is Mei Wang from Channel News Asia, which is supposedly, it's in Singapore, but she is just an echo of Western media talking points and a good cross-section. And she likes to retweet the US State Department and Human Rights Watch, etc. So let's just take a look at some of the headlines here. Here we go. Civilian-formed defense forces in Yangon, Myanmar, issue advisory to all in commercial city to avoid gathering in crowds, to pay bills, not to leave their homes unnecessarily, not to communicate with, act as informers, to be near military security forces. And why might that be? That's because the so-called pro-democracy protesters will murder you if they think you're an informant. So this is from Myanmar Now. This is a pro-opposition newspaper based in Myanmar. It's also funded by the US government through the NED, that list that I was showing you. They're part of that funding. 8 explosions and the shooting death of an accused informant. And it says right here, a number of soldiers and police were also believed to have been injured in a series of carefully timed explosions. So we're supposed to believe, right? We're supposed to believe that these were all just peaceful pro-democracy protesters like just last month. And now suddenly they're doing all of these coordinated bombings, assassinations, and also armed clashes with Myanmar's military in just like a month or two. That's what we're supposed to believe if we were following and believing people like Mei Wang and the Western sources she cites. That's what we're supposed to believe. Here's another one. This clear, public, daring act of defiance against and challenge to the Myanmar military will likely cause uneasiness and most definitely infuriate the military even more. Worry of many is at what price will civilians have to pay when clashes intensify? Because of course, oops, I was supposed to be sharing the screen. Here we go. Yeah, so this is the tweet that I was just reading. And this is the supposed pro-democracy protesters in matching uniforms, In other pictures, they've all got M16s. Where did all of that come from? And we saw this exact same thing happen in Libya and Syria, where one day we were told they're just peaceful protesters, and then the next day they're well-trained, seasoned militants with war weapons and logistical lines fighting the Syrian army. How did that happen? And I'll tell you how it happened. This is state-sponsored. Just think about if you, Angelo, you just wanted to just start an armed militia, how impossible that would be without huge amounts of resources. Where are these people getting these resources? They're getting it from the US, from the UK, and allies in the region that are helping funnel these weapons into the country.
Yes, and again, they are trained by ethnic armed militias. And keep in mind that the ethnic armed militias, many of them are funded by the US. They are supported by the US. I think clearly we're entering. The wording is going to change very soon. I think we're entering into a civil war. We've seen in the last few days bombing. I mean, they're bombing infrastructure. They just bomb a train. Rangoon Mandalay train, they bombed the bridge.
The terrorists, you mean? The terrorists are bombing infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. This is terrorism. So, so from the beginning, they were not pacifists. They had arms, they were fighting with pretty much equal arms. And there were people dying from both sides, military and on the other side. So it's just that the narrative has been hijacked by the Western media. So now we're entering into a civil war. And there is what is worrying is that you have those ethnic armed groups which were all along fighting off and on, I would say, against the Tatmadaw, the military from Myanmar. And they've been training the opposition. There's a name they call themselves. Do you remember the name of those opposition group? They form an army. It's a protective. I don't know which. Well, they got themselves a name. So it looks like the whole structure, all the steps. It sounds very familiar. There's a R2P. They're asking for intervention. You have assets being freezed. There's $1 billion which are frozen. There is an exile government which is recognized by the US, and we could imagine that the asset frozen that they will be able just to have access to those frozen assets, the same as Juan Guaido had with Venezuela. So you see, there's a repetition. Sanctions, even before Myanmar had lots of sanctions. There was a huge pressure on Myanmar, but now there's going to be much more. You have a lot of projects which are stopping. Mining oil. They're stopping. I mean those resources for Myanmar are very important. So they are strangling Myanmar. So I think it's just going to be chaos. The question I'd like to ask, I mean, why Myanmar? Why and what is the goal of the US? I mean, what do you want to do? I mean, the US and also other countries are joining in. Of course, the EU is joining, Japan also. What do they want to do?
Right, that's a good question. I think you were thinking about the so-called federal army, which they're also using interchangeably with civilian defense force or people's defense force. So when they're fighting with war weapons against the military and the military is killing them, it still sounds like the military is killing unarmed civilians, even though they all have war weapons. And they're obviously militants, they're violent, and they're terrorists, as I just pointed out. Let's do two things, and then we'll get back to why the U.S. is doing this. Here's Mei Wang talking about the death toll, and who is she citing? This is AAPP, and I've talked about this before. AAPP is the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, and you can see the graphics that Mei Wang was including in her tweets, and you can see the running tally right there, the number of arrests. et cetera, but what is the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners? And they have in parentheses Burma, and maybe you'd be confused because where are they based? They're actually based in Thailand. They're not even in Myanmar. And worse still, here we are back at the NED's website. This is the US government funding arm for sedition and political interference around the globe. This is Ko Bo Chi. He is a founder and joint secretary of the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. And the AAPP is funded by the NED, because if you look up any of these publications that they list here, it says so right in those reports that he wrote that's funded by the US government. So getting back to what's going on in Myanmar, this is the kind of stuff that they're reporting now. They're just showing the opposition with weapons in the streets. I want to go back to this one actually, where they're talking about this man that they murdered. He was a ward administrator, and he was shot dead by 3 men, according to a local resident who spoke to Myanmar Now. And listen to what they just killed him in cold blood. He wasn't fighting with them. He didn't have arms. They targeted him for assassination. And they're saying many junta-appointed ward administrators have been accused of tipping off regime authorities about the activities and whereabouts of activists. He was a notorious informant. Many of those who got arrested were because of him. He even cooked for and fed the junta's armed forces. So for the crime of not joining the opposition and supporting the military, they murdered him. He was not a direct threat to them. They murdered him. So when we go back to that tweet from Mei Wang,
it's mafia style. Huh? It looks like mafia style.
Exactly. It's like the mafia. So right here, when they say, "Do not communicate with or act as informants," why are they warning you about that? Because they'll murder you if you do. That's what they're saying. That's what Mei Wang and that's what the Western media. This is the message that they're helping promote, and they refuse to call this terrorism or an atrocity, which is exactly what it is. This is what they were accusing the military of doing. Now they're doing it, and they're not letting anyone in these targeted cities where these arms clashes are taking place. They're not letting people just be neutral or to decide for themselves. You either join the armed opposition or they'll murder you. This is the message that I'm getting.
It reminds me a little bit of what they did in Hong Kong. You know, in Hong Kong, they were forcing people to take side. So basically, you had to declare yourself, okay, are you blue, which is pro-Beijing, pro-China, or are you yellow, pro-West, pro-US? And this is a good way just to better polarize and antagonize the parties. You know, you have lots of people which are not very politicized. You know, not everybody is politicized and is radical either for either sides. So this is how you create war. The same as Maidan. You know, Maidan, they really wanted to polarize by having people to declare, are you for the Russians or are you for Ukraine pro-West? And it's very dangerous when you start in this direction. It's very dangerous because you know the result is only war and the destruction of the whole civil society. You know, that couples, you know, you have friends, you have families. You know, families that they are destroyed. And I'm sure you know we might find lots of similarities with Hong Kong, where you have different generations. You know, like you have the older that have a better understanding of history, and the young that are more emotional and easier targets for Western propaganda. You know, we sell them through Hollywood movies. We sell them some utopia of Western freedom, when in reality, you know, especially at the stage of Myanmar, which is a very poor country, Myanmar needs to deal with other things: sovereignty first, peace, and so on. If you don't have peace, internal peace, how can you have elections? And it's much more complex. It's not. We are talking about a country which was always at war with 135 nationalities. When you have a state like this, democracy is almost impossible, because especially when people, they start to vote with clans, you side with your clan. Well, what is going to happen is the mob rule. Imagine if you have democracy where you have your mob rule, you have 60% of the population, which is one ethnic group. We are going to rule over the rest, and we are thinking about ourselves. This is when we have to challenge democracy. The democracy works if you have certain preconditions. And in reality, right now, Myanmar are at the opposite. They don't have any conditions to have a democracy. Imagine, they don't have sovereignty. You have meddling, you have hijacking of democracy. So basically, everything, you have a strong opposition to the military, which is completely hijacked by the West. They're taking orders. You have those advisors of Aung San Suu Kyi. They are all foreigners. Some of them, they just came out from the U.S. State Department, and they're telling Aung San Suu Kyi what to do. Then you have all the media, most of the media, which are funded by Western powers. You have all this meddling. I want to add just something. You mentioned NED. There's a fund, $42 million from USAID, which was transferred. Normally, USAID is supposed to be related to helping, feeding people, education, and so on. But 42 million, they were taken and transferred to fund civil society. Imagine $42 million, what it can do into a poor country like Myanmar. Civil society, that means it's going to fuel civil war. That's the message.
I think that is the perfect way to circle back to your question about why is the US doing this? Why aren't they building bridges and railroads and things that Myanmar actually needs to move forward as a nation? That's because China is already doing that. And the US, quite frankly, they're incapable of doing that. And for decades, they have not been capable of doing anything remotely like that. Even their own infrastructure at home is rotting out from under the American people. And again, it was because of things like that. The F-35 is more important. It's more important to spend $1 trillion on that than on things the American people need. And so why is the US so desperate to divide and destroy Myanmar? Why is the US, the UK, and Brussels, the European Union, why are they so desperately involved in Myanmar's internal political affairs? And why are they driving this conflict? And the answer is China. The US openly seeks to encircle and contain China. It's not even a secret anymore. It's something that is mentioned by the president, by the Secretary of State in speeches, that China is the main threat and that they have to rise up and confront China. You and I have talked in the past about all of the money being invested in smearing and attacking China through the media, but they're also doing things like this. They're going into countries that have close relationships with China, and they're destabilizing and trying to destroy them. They're doing the exact same thing here in Thailand. We have the exact same sort of mobs in the streets. They're not quite as violent because they haven't gotten their hands on guns yet, thankfully. But they openly link themselves together with the protests in Myanmar. They actually have people from Myanmar protesting in the streets here, and they were linked with the protests in Hong Kong. So this is a region-wide arc of chaos the US is deliberately creating to encircle and contain China. You were talking about the One Belt, One Road initiative. They're like lifelines extending out of China to drive development all across the region, and the US is just picking one after the other and trying to cut them off. So there's one in Thailand, there's one in Myanmar, and surprise, there's US-backed instability in both countries. Imagine that. So it's not a coincidence. And they're doing the same thing in Pakistan. There was a port project in Baluchistan, which is the southwest province in Pakistan. The US is backing armed militants and separatists there. And then in China itself, the Xinjiang situation, these extremists were being encouraged and backed fully by the US and its allies because they were trying to carve off territory from China itself. So this is a concerted, region-wide campaign, and Myanmar is just one chapter in this story of what the US is doing to encircle and contain China in its desperate bid to stop China from surpassing it and uprooting US hegemony around the globe.
Yeah, Brian, there are lots of people that are telling me, oh, well, Aung San Suu Kyi, she's been signing Belt and Road Initiative deals and so on, and it's total BS. Actually, she's been, she's been talking to Xi Jinping, she's been signing some deals, but she did everything to stop the Belt and Road Initiative, everything she could. She was pressured by the military. The military, when the Belt and Road Initiative for Myanmar, especially, there is a very low level of infrastructure, especially when why do you have like those wars with the ethnic armed groups? It's because you don't have that infrastructures. They are in very remote areas, where in the jungle, and they're doing drug trades, they're doing lots of things on their own, and it's not unifying the country. So what Aung San Suu Kyi and a foreign advisor managed to do in Myanmar is to stop 3 major projects. I mean, there are more, but there's a deep sea port. Altogether, we're talking about $10 billion of infrastructure projects. So deep sea port, there is a huge mining project, and there's a very big dam. So they are just on hold. Those projects are on hold. And it's a success for the US, but it's a complete failure for Myanmar, because Myanmar needs to modernize. And again, we've seen with it, but with China, you do first the infrastructure, you put the foundation, and then you can build everything around it. And again, the US doesn't care about Myanmar. You're just going to create chaos. And it's a proxy war between the US and China, and China is not going to meddle into Myanmar. It might just be try to help in negotiation, like it did in the past. Remember, China has been trying to help to negotiate between the armed groups and Tatmadaw. Because it's enacting the region. 30% of the trade is with China. It's not with the US. They promised, if Myanmar was to become a democracy, they promised lots of funding, lots of help. It never happened. The only help that came in was for regime change, was
exactly
to destabilize Myanmar. It's extremely selfish, and it's very evil. Chaos in Myanmar, it's what, to my opinion, it's what the US is trying to achieve here.
Yes, and if you look through this list here, that all the things the US government is funding, let's see if we can find. You can see things like this for environmental issues and resource management. And what is that? That is the US funding these groups that would go out and protest things like ports and pipelines and mines and that dam. And that was Aung San Suu Kyi's followers who were out there protesting that dam, getting that stopped. And so Aung San Suu Kyi, I think, she has to face the reality that the country does most of its business with China, and Western liberalization of the economy and then strip mining Myanmar didn't happen yet. So of course she has to go visit the president of China and talk and discuss and manage the trade that's already ongoing. But at the end of the day, the vector sum of everything she's done as a politician, as an opposition figure, and then while in power, was to stop and cut off and roll back Myanmar-Chinese relations. And that was the whole purpose of putting her in power in the first place. This is why the US has spent millions upon millions of dollars over decades getting her and her party into power and building up this massive parallel state within a state to creep in and strangle Myanmar's sovereignty right from under the people. And then I made the prediction back in March that the Western media wasn't going to be able to cover up the armed violence, and they would have to admit that it was an armed conflict. It wasn't protests anymore. And now that has happened. And now my next prediction is this, and then after this, I'll get your thoughts on it, and then maybe we can wrap it up. The next prediction is, if somehow this US-backed opposition manages to defeat the central government and Myanmar's military. Once that's done, they're going to go back to killing each other, because a lot of these groups hate each other and have fought in the past. And they're not going to accept any sort of, power sharing or anything. They're all going to vie for power. The Burman ethnic minority that backs Aung San Suu Kyi, they're going to want to consolidate control over the whole country. All those ethnic groups are going to want to continue going for independence. So you're going to see exactly what we saw in Libya, just chaos. And if they cannot defeat the central government and military, they're going to start eventually fighting amongst themselves again anyway, while also fighting the central government, kind of like what's going on in Syria. And then this is going to hopefully it'll die out. But what are the prospects of that happening soon, and the country being able to recover it, in the near future and actually start moving forward? I think it's a very bad outlook for Myanmar. What do you think about that, Angelo?
I'll go back to this. I'd like to talk about, just to go back to the environmental movements, and you see this, the green. This is the new green around the world, which are actually a complete manipulation. I think it's ridiculous when you have environmentalists from the West, developed countries, very rich countries, which they have become rich because of exploiting the global South. They go to the global South, to those people who don't have any food, and they come with those ideals of, you cannot build this dam. We don't want you to develop because this dam is like nature and so on. But you know what? They don't have food. They don't have roads. How can you go? You are getting like Western salaries, and you live like very comfortable life in Myanmar, and you're trying to lecture the global South. It's just ridiculous. And I think there's a new movement, green movement. You see that especially in Germany, they call themselves green, but it's just a new weapon. It's just to divide the left, anti-war movement. And in reality, they are in Germany. They're going against Nord Stream 2. So they are going. The Germans would, if Nord Stream 2 stops, the Germans would buy gas, which is more polluting gas, more expensive from the US. And then the Greens are calling for more spending, army spending, defense spending. So they are pro-NATO. So it's completely an hypocrisy. So it's very dangerous. Those movements they need to be watched. It's a new trend. We need to be very careful. Going back to my vision for Myanmar, I agree with you. The worst case, it's I think military for the moment is a minor evil. If they need a cohesion. They need to protect the sovereignty of Myanmar. If this falls apart, we are talking about the balkanization of Myanmar, the same that happened in Yugoslavia. They are going to fight each other like crazy. The only thing that was uniting the whole country was the military so far. That's a unifying force. Again, most of the time, wherever you go around the world, the most patriotic are the army, and it's the last string. Once the army is no more there, it's first the police, then the army. The army is gone. There's nothing else. And I see the same as Thailand. You see those unifying forces. The monarchy is the same in Thailand. It's a unifying forces. It's sometimes it can be counterintuitive, especially for Westerners. We tend to see the army as being an oppressing force. It's not. It's the last string that keeps cohesion, especially in countries that like extremely unstable, like Myanmar. They just came out from colonization, and they actually they didn't decolonize. A lot of countries there was an official decolonization, but decolonization never happened. We call about Africa. Africa is still colonized. 14 countries in Africa are still using French CFA French currency. So the whole economy is controlled by France. Decolonization hasn't happened. And this is why I think China is essential, that China becomes the counterbalance to US hegemony, and maybe the global South will have its word. And no more meddling, because with China, we are going to back to multilateral and democratic world, because it's not democratic now. Now it's whoever has US dollar, and weapons control the world right now. And
Yes.
Again, US doesn't have allies; it has hostages. The world is hostage of the US.
That's actually a lot of really good points you just made there, especially how we still have imperialism. Right now, in the year 2021, we have imperialism, which really shouldn't be that hard for people to believe. I mean, the US literally has its army occupying other people's countries right now as we're talking. And you talk about the green movement and environmentalism and how they are hiding behind these things to exert control over other people's countries, over their affairs that no outsider has any right interfering in, and things that the US or the UK or the EU would never tolerate another nation interfering within their borders. And you said about the balkanization of Myanmar. This is so dangerous because if that happens, it is going to be a constant source of crime, of violence, of weapons trafficking, of refugees flooding out in all directions, just like what happened to Libya. It became a springboard. And again, it wasn't like just spontaneous and these criminal groups just doing whatever they wanted. The US was also using it as a springboard to destabilize other countries in the region, in North Africa and the Middle East. So this is what we can expect if Myanmar falls. So it's something I want to kind of point out to people who live in ASEAN and people in government here in ASEAN. They need to be very careful about the pressure being put on them by the West to toe the line and put pressure to help the opposition in Myanmar, and the reality that if the opposition prevails, it's going to be the end of Myanmar, and it's going to be the end of a stable, prosperous Asia in general. And again, that would suit the US just fine because they don't want a functioning puppet regime there. They want a burning pile of cinders because it means no one belt, one road going through Myanmar. So on that very bleak note, I think we're gonna end it because we're coming up onto 1 hour. As always, Angelo, thank you so much for
pleasure, Brian. Let's keep on doing this show. I really enjoy. I think we need to tell the world, like the other version of the story. Well, just because the other side is completely being censored right now, and this is the time. The time is very important now. It's before there's war, civil war, full civil war, because whole Asia is going to suffer.
Yes, so we're going to keep talking about Myanmar because very few other people are. And for my Thai audience, obviously, it should be important to them because it's right next door and it's going to affect Thailand. And for China watchers, people who admire China and like what it's doing and the rise of multipolarism, Myanmar is like the faulty shingle on the roof and it's being blown up. And if it might take the whole roof off if people are not careful. So thank you again, Angelo. And yes, we will definitely do this next week. So I will see you next week and I'll see everyone watching next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye for now.